Hello, friends, and stop me if you've seen this movie before. It goes something like, "Oh, baby, let's try to work it out for old time's sake." That's right. Today we're going to talk about reconciliation and what happens when couples reconcile during or right after a divorce. Welcome back to the Divorce Broadcast. My name is Manny Segarra, coming to you from Miami, Florida. Alrighty, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about the R word today, which is reconciliation. What does that mean? That means the parties get back together and save their marriage. I am a big fan of parties saving their marriage, especially when there's children involved. It spares the children from having to see their family unit break up. The parties save money on the cost of a divorce and the attorneys and all of those other costs, and they don't have to go through the emotional turmoil of having to go through a divorce. So because of all this, whenever someone comes to me for an initial consultation, I always ask them, can you save your marriage? If you can, do it. I tell them to go to either marriage counseling, individual therapy, or individual counseling. If they can, go talk to their local priest, rabbi, go to their church, their mosque, speak to their elder, whoever, it doesn't matter. Whatever they can do to fix their marriage, I always tell them try, because as I mentioned, huge fan of preserving the marriage. So a lot of people ask me, is this a real thing? Do people actually get back together after they file for divorce? And surprisingly, the answer is yes. I would say that the great majority don't, unfortunately, but there are cases in which couples work out their marriage either right before they file or right after they file, during the proceedings, or sometimes maybe after they get divorced. I have a lot of friends that have gone through this process. I'm thinking of a particular couple in mind that they, for a couple years, were always getting a divorce, and they kept calling me. So eventually I just ignored them. They weren't going to get a divorce because they absolutely loved each other. So it is a thing. It does happen. And a lot of times people, if they can communicate better, can work it out. So now we're going to talk about what happens if the couple gets together, and it kind of depends on the stage of divorce. So I will talk about the 3 different stages in which I've seen couples get back together while they were divorcing. The first stage in which I've seen couples reconcile or get back together is while the divorce is pending. Someone had filed for divorce, perhaps the party were exchanging discovery, perhaps they were dealing with some temporary issues, and at some point they began to speak to each other and decided that they want to work it out. One of the things that can happen is that the court or the parties can agree to go to marriage counseling. If the parties go to marriage counseling to try to preserve the marital unit, the court will also abate or temporarily suspend the proceedings to allow the couple to finish the marriage counseling. In the event that the marriage counseling or some other form of intervention is successful and the parties decide that they want to stay together, then what ends up happening is that the petitioner will file what's called a voluntary dismissal. The divorce will be dismissed and the couple will go off holding hands into the sunset. The second stage is when a couple gets back together after they execute or sign the agreements. Let's say that they went to a mediation, they executed a parenting plan or a agreement regarding their equitable distribution of their property, and then after that agreement, they decide to get back together. Well, when it relates to the children, you will see that a lot of divorce attorneys will put in provisions to the parenting plan that say that the parenting plan will remain in effect, full force in effect, even if the parties get back together. However, remember, after the agreement is entered or the parenting plan is entered, if there is a substantial material and unanticipated change in circumstances, something significant has happened that has changed, then either parent can modify the parenting plan. With regard to the property settlement remains the same. Once you sign off on the property, that's it. It cannot be modified under Florida law. All right, let's talk about the third situation, which I find to be the most fascinating. Before you ask, it does happen, and that is when a couple signs the parenting plan and the marital settlement agreement and they officially get divorced. A little bit of time passes, the flames of passion are rekindled, they get back together, they get remarried, and then there may be a second divorce between the same parties. As I mentioned, this happens. It happens rarely, but when it does happen, as in the second situation, the property should remain the same. The only thing that is affected is if there's any property that was purchased by by the parties either jointly or during the marriage after the initial divorce. That is subject to distribution by the court in the second divorce. When it becomes very interesting is when there is another child that is born in that second marriage that wasn't born in the first marriage. For example, let's say the parties had 2 children the first time around, they get divorced, there's a parenting plan for these 2 children. They move on, get back together, and then get remarried. While they're remarried, if a third child is born and there's a subsequent divorce, then the court will have jurisdiction to set a schedule for that third child, but the original schedule for the 2 will remain the same unless there's a substantial change in circumstances. Now, as a pro tip, a lot of times as an attorney, you want to try to get all 3 kids on a similar schedule. So you would have to change or modify the original time-sharing schedule to match the third child, or the subsequent time-sharing schedule. So that's when the cases get a little bit more interesting, but it's worth discussing because these things do indeed happen. And that's a wrap on this reconciliation video. I did it for all of those true believers in love. You know, those of you who will show up with your boombox outside the bedroom window of your significant other to try to save your marriage. If you know anyone that is having these types of issues, please have them look us up at www.segarralawfirm.com. We have offices located in Miami and Orlando, Florida. Se habla español. If you like this video, please hit the like button and share with anybody who is trying to figure out how to reconcile, and tell them that we support them 100%. We will talk to you all soon.